So I'm Nick Kolba. I am the co-founder and the lead on the FTC3 group within FINOS. I'm going to talk to you today about the experience of building FTC3 over the past 2 years and what we can apply to other standards efforts both in and outside of finance. But before I get to that, I wanted to demo some of the concepts that really drove the inspiration for FTC3. Oh, Siri, come on, it's not about you. Okay, so I'm going to cut over to my machine here. And what we see now, warning, this is just me hacking on OpenFin's FTC3 implementation, as well as a bunch of web platform stuff, CSS, vanilla JavaScript, etc. So please be kind. So FTC3 is composed of 3 main parts that support the standards. The first one is an app directory standard. And what we see here is, this is why one should not use their dominant hand, their non-dominant hand. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so what we see here is a app directory that is going to a service that returns a bunch of metadata around the identity of these applications, as well as the kinds of things that they support. So these little icons here actually indicate what FTC3 intents are supported by these applications. You can see view news, view contact, view social, and view chart for this charting application. Some of these are standard FTC3 intents, like view chart, view news. Some of them are ones that I've invented that exist in my desktop agent, which is the term in FTC3 for a platform that implements FTC3, like view contact and view social. So I brought up this blotter chart, which I built actually using a off-the-shelf AG grid component. And it's really simple. This is just a bunch of people involved with FTC3, actually. And I'm just using it as a sort of starting point to show some of the intents functionality. So if I go here to view chart, I'm now going to raise an intent for viewing a chart. So this application that's living in its own world is going to say, hey, I want to view a chart for Apple. And when we click on this, I now actually get a choice of charting applications I could use to fulfill this intent, because there's actually 2 different applications in my directory that support view chart. I'm going to choose the trading view chart. It's going to route not just the intent, but also the context around that intent to that chart. I'm now going to see a chart for Apple. If I click on another instrument, like Microsoft, it's going to broadcast that out using FTC3's API again, and this totally separate charting application is going to get that context and load up the new context in response. I can also raise other intents, like for example this view social thing I totally made up. I can see social data for this instrument. In this case I'm going to look at StockTwits. I now load the StockTwits application, and again these things know nothing about each other, and it's been passed over the Google context, and so I'm now viewing both a chart and some information from StockTwits on Google, and I can actually again broadcast context and move that around. Now I'm looking at Amazon. So I can also do other things, right? Let's say I want to view a contact, right? So there's this view contact intent I've created, which also is using the standard context data type from FTC3. I can again open this up and I get some choices of things that will fulfill this intent. I'm going to look at Rico on LinkedIn. He spoke earlier today. I hope you guys caught that. It was a really good talk. And now I'm looking at Rico's profile on LinkedIn, It looks like I have a message. And I can even now, I'm going to raise an intent for view social on adaptive and pass that over to LinkedIn and get this information on adaptive, which is, you can see how this, you can start to build really seamless workflows across applications that don't necessarily know anything about themselves using this. So that was the second part of FDC3, which is intents and context data, which is one of the central things that the app directory houses for us, though it can also come dynamically as well. So the third main part of FDC3 is the API. And the real purpose of the API is to make it really easy for people to adopt FDC3. And even fools like me can build stuff like this. And one of the new things that we've done with the API is create an API for channel linking, which I'm going to show right now. This is a concept that's usually expressed as color linking in finance. So if I put these all onto the red channel, I'm getting the same behavior as I did before because I had these things all on just broadcast, but now I'm going to open up this guy on Apple, and as I change the red channel, this one stays the same. And in fact, I could put this onto a green channel. If I switch my grid over to the green channel, I can now change that context separately. So you can see you can start dividing up my applications into different sets of contexts. Now, we've seen this now. I've just been demoing with stuff that I've built, right, for a demo. And some of these things are actually just web applications, but they're all things within somewhat my level of control. The really great thing about the FDC3 at this moment now is that FDC3 is now live in production with a number of vendors and companies within finance. So just to end this with one last thing, which is to show you this working with FactSet. So this is FactSet live in production. This is their news application. And I'm going to put these guys all in the red channel. And you can see I can move all these apps over to Facebook. Now, FactSet is working in concert with this TradingView app I put together, this StockTwits app that I put together, and they all work seamlessly. In fact, I can search in FactSet, it can raise a new context, and it gets broadcast to the other applications. And I can even do that from the TradingView app. And you'll see that FactSet also picks up that context. Now, we can only do this because of standards like FDC3, or at least we can only do it this easily. So that's my signal to now cut over to talking about how we got to those standards. And sorry, do I need to do anything, or can you cut it over to back to the slide deck? Do I just do this? No. Okay. So, a little history on FDC3. So, FDC3 has existed for basically 2 years. It was started by OpenFin back in October of 2017. We had a slide deck and about 12 people that we knew, and we got people together who we felt were interested in talking about interoperability across the industry and started working out standards. In May of 2008, we contributed FDC3 into FINOS. At that point, we had about 40 firms participating. We had 4 standards working groups set up. And then by the end of 2018, we had standards ratified for 1.0, and we released 1.0 in March of 2019. That involved 10 core contributor firms, and we had about 100+ member community at that point, which is essentially where we are today. Though today where we are is that we have those standards now in production across the industry with leading firms like FactSet, you just saw, JP Morgan, and OpenFin, which you saw as well. And that puts things at a very exciting place. So these are some of the firms that make up the FTC3 community. A lot of these are kind of, they are supporters and listening, but they're not necessarily active members. But all of these guys have signed up and are interested in following this project. So how do we do this? Now, the title of this talk is, how to create a standards group in 5 easy steps. And that's a little bit of a bait and switch. Sorry. These aren't really 5 easy steps. They're more of the constellations that we've used to guide us along the way as we've built FTC3. And it is a very iterative process. There should be an arrow going from the bottom to the top, but when we moved the slides over to get it onto the screen, that arrow got lost. Sometimes there are these casualties. So, but this is a process that has to start small and be repeated over and over and over again. So step 1, you got to find a problem. So what is a good problem to have for standards? Interesting fact, there are about 400 million pounds of bacon, apparently, in the US reserves today. So a lot of people would consider this a good problem to have. Good problems are obvious and they're in your face when it comes to standards. You don't start standards around shy problems. Those are usually great technical problems that you can use to build a moat. But they aren't good standards problems because they don't really have the right balance and you can't get the stakeholders to the table. This is the world before FTC3. This is a strong reason why we created FTC3. You had walled gardens that provided interop within their walls. These might be Bloomberg, they might be Refinitiv Icon, et cetera, et cetera. You then had companies like OpenFin that provided message bus and platform for applications to run. And you could have messaging between all these applications if they're running on OpenFin, and you could even run messaging between OpenFin or other things in these walled gardens, as well as you had a set of long tail of kind of one-off apps running on various different technology stacks that you also could run pipes between all these things. The problem is that without a standard around how you run those pipes, how applications are identified, and what the languages that they're speaking over those pipes, all those integrations have to be one-off bilateral agreements that have to be worked out ahead of time, and that becomes really expensive and you leave a lot of value on the table. Most integrations just didn't happen because they're just too expensive to do. So it really comes down to weighing the value of things. And I think it's a pretty simple equation, which is that if the value of the IP by having the thing become a standard is greater than the value of the IP for the stakeholders for keeping it proprietary, then you have something that's a good candidate for standardization, because people decide, hey, there's no point in competing over, whose message bus. What's really important is to have a world where we can compete over who builds the best implementation of this kind of new interoperability engine. So step 2, you have to convince the relevant people to care. I like Lord of the Rings. I think this is a good metaphor. It's also, you have to be willing to walk to Mordor because it's a really, really long road building these kinds of standards. And you have to make it interesting because it's a long walk to Mordor. And this could mean beer, but it doesn't necessarily mean beer. But you need to give people a reason to show up. You need to make the topics interesting, and you need to run productive and effective meetings. And most importantly, you need to build a really strong sense of community. The community is really essential. It's really critical that you can make the stakeholders the heroes of this story. And these are some of the people that have been like key active contributors to FDC3 over the past 2 years. So I want to recognize this has been a huge group effort, and this is something that could not have happened without all these people and many more. You have to ensure neutrality is step 3, right? This is absolutely important. You need to be like Switzerland. So a big part of that is don't start from an existing solution, commercial or otherwise. OpenFin, when we created FDC3, there was absolutely nothing about OpenFin in the definition of FDC3 at all. So, and we've kept it that way. It's stayed completely separated out. You also need to make things open source from start. So FDC3, again, was Apache 2 license day one, and has remained so. So everything that happens in FDC3 happens in the open. This is absolutely critical. And having a neutral space like a FINOS that creates a great set of governance and structure and has a very visible sense of neutrality was also incredibly important. So contributing FDC3 into FINOS was really critical for us to reach a point of scale with FDC3 and keep it moving forward, and to create assurance that this was going to remain a neutral standard. Big part of that, that goes with that is ensuring that you have multiple and balanced stakeholders. So if you saw that list of stakeholders before, you'd see buy-side firms, sell-side firms, vendors, content providers, consultancies, etc. It's a wide range of stakeholders that make up this this community and keep it very balanced and keeps us honest. So step 4, define the least common denominator. This is incredibly important. You have to always try to reduce things down to what's the smallest thing we can do in terms of creating the standard. So if you take the position that the standards have to be all or nothing, then you will fail. This can't be done. You need to make it the lowest bar possible for adoption. This needs to be super easy. So with FDC3, one of the things that we did early on is we separated the standards out into separate things, as I mentioned before: app directory, context data, intents, API. All those things can be used almost independently, right? You can have an app directory for FDC3 without having the other things. You can just send FDC3 standard context data over your bus and have your own API. All those things are, well, we'd like you to use everything. It's valid and allows people to come in at the level that they can come in. Because remember, everybody already has their own systems for doing this. So if you make it so they have to do a lift and shift to an entirely new system, it's just not going to fly. Kind of going with this is you have to separate the standards from implementation. And I think this is a really, to me, a powerful image because it is like refracting light. Like it's very, when you have implementation, everything's kind of mixed together. And it'd be very hard to extract standards from implementation. So you really need to work hard, and we do this all the time within the group, is what is the standard we're going after with the with this use case? What is implementation and what's the actual standard? And then finally, if you can't get consensus or near consensus on a topic, then it's probably just not ready, right? You're going to get consensus when people are ready to really come to the table, when it's really critical for them to make it a standard. And that's the right time to push that forward. So, step 5. Oh, it looks a lot like step 1. Iterate. This is so critical, right? People don't think about this in web. It's 25 years plus, right, of web. HTML started with 14 tags, right? Nobody said, oh, we can't use this unless we have a way to do e-commerce or, blogging or have WebSockets, etc., or else we're not going to sign up for this thing. It started very, very small. Complexity in the web, when you look at it, gets pushed to the edges, to where the implementation lives. And that is really super critical. Again, because it's in the implementations that you're going to work out what makes sense as a standard and what doesn't. I'm running out of time. You have to keep knocking on doors. This is really important. Again, going back to community, you need to keep iterating on community and moving that forward, reaching out to people. Those things are fought, one person at a time in terms of convincing people and getting them to care about these things. And finally, you need to iterate off of real-world implementations, which is the point we're at within FTC3 today. We have real-world implementations out there now, and now we're doing the work of starting to look at what we've done and then figuring out what are the next things that make sense to standardize in order to move those implementations to the next level. So, in conclusion, I think that FTC3 has been a really successful project so far. It's just at its beginning. But I think what's really made it successful is the framework we've created to build community and to balance political tensions and to keep our focus on the standards. And standards that can be adopted by many organizations and fit into many technical stacks. This model can be applied across many other efforts in both finance and outside of it. And I think that we can use this to build even more value upon open standards, open source, and open collaboration in finance. And I think that it's going to be a really exciting year in 2020 for FTC3. Thank you.